When Vagn spoke to me about this conference, it reminded me of my past, where I studied economics. I'm an economist by education. I spent the last 13 years in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, so I've since long been de-skilled. But I do remember one thing from my economic studies, and that was an exam I once took, where the exam question was, what is Dutch disease? And I couldn't answer it. And so I flunked, but I immediately went home and read up on what is Dutch disease, and I've never forgotten it. But let me get back to the topic. I think what's interesting about this topic is that there are, of course, many challenges related to this issue, but there are also many paradoxes. For one, I think it's an enormous challenge to international development, that so many resource-rich developing countries make such poor use of their wealth. And it is a terrifying paradox that millions of people living in resource-rich developing countries are often more likely to suffer from the lack of basic public services, from corruption and from conflict, than comparable non-resource-rich developing countries. And on top of that, they are also more likely to be poorer. Take Equatorial Guinea, a small oil-producing country on Africa's west coast with some 750,000 inhabitants. What could have been progress turned into a textbook case of the resource curse or the paradox of plenty. In 2012, according to the World Bank, the country's GDP per capita was a staggering $24,000. The continent's highest, and actually higher than rich oil states like Oman and Bahrain, and higher also than that of Korea and Portugal. However, an estimated 77% of the population lived below the national poverty line, and the life expectancy was just 53 years. In UNDP's 2013 Human Development Report, the country was ranked as number 136, and in Transparency International's Corruption Perception Index, just 163 out of 177 countries. So instead of creating prosperity, natural resources have actually too often undermined economic growth, incited armed conflict, and damaged the environment. And furthermore, cemented a level of corruption that today in many countries seems to be endemic in many, if not most, of the resource-rich developing countries. Rather than invest revenues into infrastructure, decent jobs, health and education, proceeds from oil, gas and mineral wealth often end up in the wrong pockets and in tax havens abroad, emphasizing the need to act also internationally. But just as important, at least in the long run, natural resources dependence tends to insulate leaders from public pressure and public accountability. And in many countries with significant natural resources, important checks on government power, such as long democratic culture and a vibrant civil society, are in short supply. When those in power are no longer dependent on those they govern, I think a fundamental feature in the social contract is missing. So many of the challenges I think these countries are facing, they stem from poor governance, not necessarily the nature of the resources that they hold. Poor governance, weak institutions, and the lack of sound policies, legal framework, as well as transparency and accountability mechanisms, not only rob people of the chance to hold their governments to account, but also of the prospect of a better future, funded by their own countries' natural resources, wealth of their own potential and wealth. The reality is that if these resources were properly managed and mobilized, many of the poorest countries in the world would be able to develop their own economies and improve the lives of their people by using their own resources, without depending on outside financial resources. That, I suppose, is ultimately to put all of us, or at least most of us, in the so-called aid industry out of business. That would indeed actually be a realizing the key objective of Denmark's development cooperation, to make ourselves obsolete. I'm sure that Jonas Moberg from the Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative, EITI, who is also here today, will tell you more about how EITI emerged out of this recognition a little over 10 years ago. The EITI has done a tremendous job in spearheading a global coalition of governments, companies and civil societies working together to improve transparency and accountable management of revenues from natural resources. And Denmark, Danida, the government, has been happy to be an active supporter of this important work. Transparency is, however, not enough to ensure that natural resource wealth end up benefiting the people it belongs to. And accountability does not necessarily follow in its shoes. Transitioning from transparency to accountability requires both political will and an active lead by governments. And it requires a strong and vibrant civil society which can hold governments to account and demand that decisions taken on natural resource management are participatory and inclusive so that everyone is heard. Ensuring good governance and strong public institutions, not only in regard to the management of natural resource wealth, but in all spheres of government, require long-term efforts and support. And while Denmark may not be a major player in terms of providing support and advice on how to, say, frame mining laws or deal with contract negotiations, we are, in all modesty, a significant player in our support to transparency, good governance, and anti-corruption in the countries that we are working in. We support on a daily basis the building up and in collaboration with civil society partners, both Danish, international and national, the building up of transparent, accountable and uncorrupt governments, public sectors and systems that have the power to take action and, for example, ensure that taxes are collected and royalties paid. As part of these efforts, we are currently preparing programs with a focus on tax and development in Tanzania, in Ghana and in Mozambique. And as an indispensable part of our work on strengthening the social contract, we work actively with civil society and our partner countries to give them a voice, to give them space, and to give them weight. This includes our work with Global Witness, who investigates and campaigns to expose the economic networks behind conflict, corruption, and environmental destruction in resource-rich countries. It also includes our partnership with Publish What You Pay, a coalition that works with civil society in resource-rich developing countries to promote transparency in natural resource management. 2 days ago, together with Lars, among others, a Danida-funded study by Global Financial Integrity was published. The study is about the impact of the illicit misinvoicing of trade on 5 African countries. It concluded that the fraudulent misinvoicing of trade facilitated at least $60 billion in illicit financial flows into or out of 5 African countries. The study included a country like Mozambique, which during the past few years has made new major natural gas discoveries. The report that found that $5 billion in illicit capital flowed either into or out of the country due just to trade misinvoicing over a 10-year period. With the increased revenue that Mozambique is expecting from the new gas discoveries, the volume of illicit flows stands to increase dramatically if Mozambique does not get it right. We are ready to work, as are others, with the government of Mozambique to help steer them in the right direction, to make sure that they have the systems in place and the measures in place. Legal frameworks, institutional capacity, excellent natural resource management policies are necessary. They are crucial, but they are, as all of you will know, not sufficient in themselves. If countries are to avoid or break free of what you might call the political side effects of Dutch disease, the seeming independence of power holders from their citizens, then we must constantly remain conscious of and work on strengthening the social contract, even as we work on seemingly very technical issues. The opportunities, risks and pitfalls for emerging oil, gas and mining countries are many, but the solutions are there if governments show political leadership and civil society demand transparency and accountability. And in these countries where we are engaged, we will work to promote both. Thank you for your attention. Have a wonderful day.